For 1,000 years, the convent stood as a spiritual fortress against a brutal world. It was a promised sanctuary of silence and devotion, where women entered the stone cloisters to pledge their lives to God, escaping the demands of dynastic marriage and earthly conflict. But behind those imposing walls, another drama unfolded. This was a place where human desire clashed violently with divine demand, and where the rules designed to ensure sanctity often became instruments of crushing control. What happened when a nun, sworn to perpetual chastity and poverty, allowed the outside world, or worse, human temptation, to breach her vows? The answers, preserved in brittle parchment records, are a testament to the iron grip of medieval ecclesiastical power. We are not speaking of simple penance. We are unearthing the dark history of discipline, the secret trials, the hidden cells, and the profound psychological rituals used to strip a woman of her identity, all in the name of God and institutional purity. The ideal of the nun was laid out in stark detail centuries before the Middle Ages, codified by figures like Caesarius of Arles. She was the gem of the church, a spiritual virgin whose life was a continuous cycle of prayer, modesty, and perpetual silence. The enclosure, the clausura, was paramount. It was meant to protect the nuns from the spiritual wolves of the secular world. Yet as time passed and endowments grew, some religious houses drifted, and the vow of obedience began to fray under the pressure of daily reality. The church saw these breaches not as personal failings, but as grave threats to the moral architecture of Christendom. In 1298, Pope Boniface VIII issued the decree periculoso, commanding that all nuns remain perpetually cloistered. The language of the papal bull was defensive, even fearful. Nuns must be protected from occasions for lasciviousness, and their nunnish modesty must be preserved. This decree was confirmation that scandal was not merely possible, but already dangerously present. The stakes were eternal damnation, both for the individual woman and for the reputation of the entire church. A single scandal could undermine the faith of a community and provide ammunition for the Reformation that was still centuries away. The history of this darkness is written in the silence of institutions like the 12th century, Wotton Priory in Yorkshire, where a nun reportedly took a lay lover and became pregnant. This was the ultimate transgression against her sacred promises. Though her story, recorded by Aelred of Rievaulx, was framed as a miracle of eventual forgiveness, it exposed the raw, fragile line between sanctity and the deep current of human desire that even the thickest stone walls could not entirely suppress. When a nun broke her vow, the community could not afford a public spectacle. The cloister, which was built for isolation and piety, was perfectly suited to facilitate quiet internal judgment and correction. Official church visitation records occasionally reveal the consequences, such as at Littlemore Priory in 16th century England, where a torrent of violations was uncovered. A prioress who bore a child and used convent funds for a dowry, and nuns who were held in stocks. One nun, in desperation, even burned her way free, a stark, violent act of rebellion against the spiritual coercion she endured. Another confessed to investigators, "I am ashamed to be here under the evil rule of my lady." But what of the women who didn't escape? Medieval justice rolls contain terse, unsettling entries that speak of women vanishing. At the Benedictine Priory of Clementhorpe in 1304, a nun named Cecilia was removed by night. 2 years later, Elizabeth de Hopton was seized from Kirklees. The official records suggest not an elopement, but a covert abduction by persons unknown. This raises a terrifying question. Were these women escaping, or were they being punished in secret chambers? Though the sensational stories of the mythical oubliette, a dungeon from which there is no return, are largely discounted by historians, the reality of private confinement remains plausible. Wealthy convents often had the means and the autonomy to practice internal correction. These were not public prisons, but spaces of profound psychological isolation, used for silence, correction, or simply for forgetting women whose transgression threatened the institutional facade of piety. The walls that guaranteed virtue could easily conceal coercion. Kneeling on the cold stone floor, a woman's head is bowed. The scent of fear is sharp, and the only sound is the cold scrape of metal. In a deliberate motion, the shears slice through her hair, stripping away more than just appearance. In the medieval world, A woman's hair was a symbol of honor, dignity, and even chastity. To forcibly cut it was never a trivial act. It was a ritual of profound degradation and a public mark of moral failure. This act was especially potent in the convent. The Merovingian chronicles detail how a woman entering religious life underwent a ceremonial cutting of hair, a sacred dedication, transforming her into a bride of Christ. But when used as a punishment, the same blade told a terrifyingly different story. For nuns accused of sexual misconduct or open rebellion, forced tonsure became a punitive gesture designed specifically for public humiliation. The symbolic power was absolute. Hair, once braided as a sign of virtue, became a canvas for dishonor. The punishment did not simply mark the body, it sought to rewrite the moral status of the soul. This was the peak of institutional control. The paradox, where the very instrument of sacred dedication, the shears used in the holy tonsure, was repurposed to enforce shame and disgrace upon a dissenting woman. The hair fell to the floor, and with it, the woman's standing, her identity, and her control over her own body were completely removed. It was a sentence delivered not by a magistrate in a public square, but by fellow women behind the silent high walls. Across centuries, the convent was far more than a haven of prayer. It was a rigorous battleground of obedience and defiance, silence and judgment. The medieval fascination with controlling female piety created environments where rituals turned readily into instruments of suppression. The veil, the stocks, the secret cells, and the punishing shears each held a meaning that determined the fate of individual women and underscored the harsh, unforgiving moral framework of entire societies. These hidden acts were not random cruelties. They were calculated measures designed to maintain absolute institutional authority. Writing a dark chapter of history in the quiet seclusion of the cloister, we are left to interpret the difficult line between spiritual sanctity and profound suppression. When the rules of devotion are deployed as weapons to punish dissent, how far does the morality of the institution truly extend? As the Periculoso Decretal warned, nuns were to remain perpetually cloistered so that their hearts and bodies might be safeguarded in complete chastity. But as this history reveals, when walls grow too high, even the holiest of enclosures can become a cage, haunting us with the